So to let all of you know what will happen now, as indicated, Speaker-elect, not quite Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson will go and deliver remarks. He will be sworn in by the Dean of the House. Then the Speaker will be administering the oath to members. Let's keep in mind that this is the beginning of the 119th Congress, and it's off to quite a start. But there are new members among them there on the House floor who have yet to be sworn in for the first time ever. And, of course, no one has been sworn in to officially start the 119th Congress, but they were allowed to vote in this regard for Speaker of the House. So that will be done by Speaker Johnson. So we're going to be watching for all of this. It is a bipartisan delegation, if you will, that will be escorting him there into the middle of the chamber, and that is where he will again deliver his remarks, and he will be sworn in there in the chair, a chair that he will hope to occupy for the next 2 years. We will see. It has been a rocky road. He will have a very slim majority there in the House. And of course, there's discussion about Donald Trump potentially, to use Johnson's terminology earlier, poaching more Republican members of the House of Representatives for different positions within the Trump administration. He was reported as saying to President-elect Donald Trump, please stop taking from my crew. It's going to be hard for me to be able to govern here. You know, if certainly they wouldn't be able to if there was a minority. So with a very, very slim majority now, it is probably done with those that Donald Trump will want to take from the House body to be part of his incoming administration. We have Sahil Kapoor with us, Mike Ricci, Michael Hardaway, Jonathan Capehart, and Brendan Buck as well. Jonathan, to you, what do you make of all the drama? But actually, can you congratulate the House for having done this on one vote?
Yes, actually, you can. And in fact, I put here, there's an asterisk, I believe, next to Speaker Johnson's victory, to my mind, simply because he had to delay the closing of the vote in order to get the votes needed to become the Speaker. But I give him major credit for having the foresight to not gavel out the vote and do the strong arming he needed to do to get to the magic number of 218, which he got. But I think this is where the good news for the Speaker probably ends, because now he goes into leading a House majority that, as we've been talking about since Election Day and all morning long, he can only lose about 1 or 2 votes to get anything done without Democratic help. And if he gets Democratic help, votes from Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, they'll be held to pay for him, depending on what the votes are for, with his Republican caucus. So I think that the Speaker should revel in this victory now, but he's been in the job. He knows the hell that awaits him. But there's one other person we should keep in mind here, and that's President-elect Donald Trump. He came out a few days ago expressing his support, however qualified and however less enthusiastically than we have seen in the past, and telling people, the Republicans in the House, to vote for Mike Johnson for Speaker, and yet 9 of them defied President-elect Trump. 3 of them voted for other people. 6 opted not to vote the first time their names were called. And so what that says to me is that in the end, and Speaker Johnson knows the problem he has with his caucus, but in the end, soon-to-be President Trump is going to have a problem with that caucus, especially when it comes to financial matters, fiscal matters. We saw what happened when he interjected himself into the continuing resolution fight last month, and saying something that Republicans have been dead set against for generations, and that's making any kind of deal on the debt ceiling, whereas Donald Trump was saying, let's eliminate it completely. I will be fascinated to see if he brings that up again once he's president. And one, will Republicans defy him? I bet they will. But and I think another guest in the previous hour with Andrea was talking about how they look forward to seeing what Democrats do. in that situation. So while, all attention is on the problems and the travails of Mike Johnson being re-elected Speaker of the House, we should also keep our attention on what it means for the Trump agenda come January 20th.
Yeah, absolutely. Brendan Buck, I'd like to bring you in the conversation. Jonathan makes a good point that it was wise of Mike Johnson not to gavel the first vote. He had an inclination that he might be able to get those two, Ralph Norman and Keith Self, to come round to vote for him. He was successful. He did it. But to what end? How much do you think they just ran out of time because they had to begin today at noon with this process? Do you suspect he had an inclination that they were very close and he could probably do a cloakroom chat with them? Were they not to be pleased enough to vote for him on the first go round? And what do you suspect that might have entailed? What do you think it is they will have wanted?
Well, I'll say this. When the original vote finished and there were only 3 of them, I think everybody at that point knew Mike Johnson was going to be Speaker of the House again, and it was only a matter of time. When Kevin McCarthy lost on the first ballot, he lost 19, and that ultimately became 20 on the second ballot. That was a lot of people, and they had a lot of safety in numbers. Those 3 folks were very isolated, and so Thomas Massie was never going to get there, but those other 2, I think they understood. They were on a bit of an island, and I imagine the rest of the members in that chamber were perfectly happy to let that vote stay open if it meant that they were going to resolve this and not have to go through another hour-plus round of everybody shouting their name. So they wanted to give them the time to work it out. Jonathan makes very important points. I think all of this, frankly, was just about sending a signal to the Speaker. I think we all know what that signal is, that this is going to be a tough road ahead. But the Speaker himself, I think, sent a powerful signal back today that, he is someone who is motivated and is going to fight back and not allow himself to be pushed around. He demonstrated, I think, a pretty impressive display of politics within the conference here. We don't know exactly what, if anything, he had to promise. But the fact that he was able to keep that number really low, he was clearly working the phone, he was using his relationship with Donald Trump. What promises he had to make to these 2. I think the big one that I'm curious about, and I think we may know that if it happened, but if he was able to get through this without changing the threshold for the motion to vacate, which is how many people it requires to trigger a vote to remove the Speaker. Obviously, Kevin McCarthy had that threshold at just a single member, and that was one of the concessions he had to make to keep the job. Mike Johnson was able to elevate that threshold to 9 members being required to vote to remove the Speaker. That is a big buffer for him to be able to govern, and if he was able to preserve that deal and not trade that away as part of this, I think that is very helpful for him. So again, a very impressive display of politics within the conference. Mike Johnson telling everybody that he's willing to fight and he knows what he's doing more than people perhaps give him credit for. But at the same time, of course, these members have also made clear themselves that there is 9 of them. At least folks who voted somebody else and who didn't vote the first time around, that they are perhaps willing to go after him if he does something that they don't care for.
Yeah, absolutely. Garrett Haake, I understand you've spoken with Dusty Johnson. Again, as you pointed out earlier, no relation to Mike Johnson, but certainly one of his allies. What do you glean from all that conversation?
Well, a couple of things. Most critically, he was very clear on the point that he said there were no specific deals or promises made to these 2 members to get them to change their votes while they were all in that room together off the House floor. He said all that was discussed was their commitment to working on Donald Trump and the Republican Party's agenda and sort of talking through their problems, and they would work together as a team. But there were no committee seats, no specific, votes on Bill X, nothing of the sort, he says, as a person who was in the room when those conversations happened. He was a little coy when I asked him about the role that Donald Trump played in this, saying only that he was very helpful, but not specifically saying whether or not he had talked to any of the holdouts during that period while this vote was open. And he was clear on the point that we've been kind of alluding to over this last hour, which is how important this moment is for the Republican Party, that they're able to show as they come in here to take unified control control of Washington now for the first time since 2017, that they can do something with that control, that they can walk and chew gum at the same time, and that they can govern effectively. And that he believes they were able to put at least a down payment, if you will, on that today by getting the Speaker elected on, technically, the first ballot.